So Jenny, do you want to run it until we organize the committee, or?
Sure, I can call this meeting of the Cable Advisory Committee to order at 7:01 PM. So your first agenda item is to organize the committee and designate roles. And I think I had sent an email to all of you, just speaking to some of the roles that are important to think about as you're organizing. If one among you is comfortable or savvy with web technology, then they could offer to be the person to post the agendas and the meeting minutes. That person could let me know who they are tomorrow, and I'll arrange a time to do some training and get you a login for the website. We also need to appoint a chair for the committee. Do I have any nominations to chair this committee?
I'd like to nominate Ken.
Do I have a second?
I second.
I'll second it.
Okay. May I have a motion to nominate or to appoint Ken Troop as the chair of the Cable Advisory Committee?
So
So
Yes.
Bob makes the motion. And may I have a second?
I second it.
Second from Francis. And I'll do a roll call vote. Bob,
yes,
Ken,
I guess.
Jean Pierre,
Yes.
Francis,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Danielle,
Yes.
and I think I got everyone. So the motion passes unanimously. Congratulations, Ken. You are the chair and you can take over from here.
All right. We ought to have a secretary, somebody that can do the minutes, and we have the advantage of the fact that the meeting is recorded, that whoever that is can even be absent and still be able to do the minutes. And so that's kind of a good thing. And if somebody else wants, once we get organized and stuff, if somebody else wants to chair, I would be happy to do the minutes. I have a reputation on the master planning committee of the way I do minutes, and so I don't know whether that's justified or not, but they like it, and so we could do that if that were needed, but we can worry about that later on. But if somebody would take responsibility tonight for taking notes and going back to the recording if need be, and creating some minutes, that would be great. They don't have to be hugely detailed, just to cover the main things that we talk about. Jenny, did you have other roles that you
No, like I
had told
mentioned,
people about? Because I don't remember
yeah,
that being mentioned.
the secretary very easily could be the person that posts the agendas and minutes on the website, or that could be a different role on your committee. Doesn't make a difference to me how it's done. I just know that that function needs to be appointed to somebody, in addition to somebody to take the minutes. And if anybody has never taken minutes before and they're feeling uncomfortable volunteering for that role, I'm happy to work with anybody to let them know,
Yeah,
what needs to go in.
and I
minutes.
similarly would be happy to work with somebody on that.
I was going to say, I'm happy to do the web stuff. That's what I do for a living. So I'm happy to
great.
do the posting and things like that. I'm not a great note taker though. They make sense to me, but they usually don't make sense to anybody else. So.
Okay. Well, it's good to have that part of it, and we can figure the other out as we go. Um, Okay, so we'll come back to, well, will somebody volunteer now to do minutes for tonight? And then we can worry about whether that person or somebody else is actually the secretary all the time after that. But would somebody be willing to do some minutes?
And I'll actually add, there are boards in town that have a rotating minutes, so it doesn't
Yeah,
need
that
to be
would all right,
appointed
too.
to one
Yeah, if somebody
person.
would just do it tonight, that would be helpful, I think.
And do minutes tonight.
Okay. So it's hard to know where to start exactly, but let me just mention that the sort of the end goal in all of this is a signed contract with Comcast for another 10 years. But in the course of getting there, it's an opportunity to get further input from the community as to what they would like to see in the way of cable service, and to the extent that that flows over into internet, which it sort of does and sort of doesn't. And it's also an opportunity to talk with, in more detail, Comcast about what they can and can't do, or will and won't do, and all of that sort of stuff, to try to get to the point where, when the contract is signed, we get a decent amount of money out of it so that the town can continue to do what it's been doing as far as cable TV is concerned. So on the one hand, it's a fairly straightforward goal of coming up with a contract. But on the other, it's an opportunity to do a lot of outreach and discussion in the community, and really in the towns that are similar to us or that are around us, especially those who have recently done contracts with Comcast. Because as you can imagine, if you were Comcast, you would want to standardize things as much as you could in the 300 or 350 or whatever it is towns that you potentially provide cable service in. And so one of the things that I think we need to do fairly early on is to reach out to our neighbors, especially to Stowe and Lancaster, with whom, of course, we share the school district, but also people like, well, Harvard doesn't have Comcast, so they may not be a good one. But anyway, some of the other towns that have Comcast, and just get copies if they've, presumably, since we're in our 9th year, many of the other towns more recently than that have updated their contracts. And so it would be good to know what sorts of things they were able to get in their contracts, because that's what we could certainly ask for. To ask for a lot of new stuff is certainly possible, but to get it may or may not be, because again, they're trying to standardize things as much as they can across the towns that they have. Now, the one person that has not been introduced in our group here, who's on the phone with us, is Nikki McAkee, who is the head of Bolton Access Television, and she is in a position to help us in a number of ways, particularly in knowing what's going on in other towns and working with them and things of that sort. Has the advantage of being a Stowe resident, and previously worked at the Stowe station, so is familiar with how they operate, and I believe they did a contract either just a year or two ago, and I think Lancaster did one 2 or 3 years ago at the most. And so I think Nikki will be able to help us with that sort of thing. So what I tried to provide to all of you was sort of some of the key documents as I saw them that came out of the or that were involved in the last process that we went through. And another thing that I think we need to do is to reach out to the state and have a discussion with what at the time at least was the Department of Telecommunications, I believe was the name or something like that. And just find out from them, from their perspective, what's needed in contracts these days and whether essentially how things have changed, if at all, from where they sit in the last 10 years. So I think that would be a good thing. And whether we want to do that as a group of 7 or whether we want to have 1 or 2 people make that kind of contact and work with some of the other towns, I think we can figure out as we go. But let me stop a second. And in fact, why don't we take the opportunity for everybody to introduce themselves and tell, with a little brief background, and then I guess any particular interests that you have in being on the committee. JP, when you do the minutes, you don't need to write what everybody says, simply the fact that people gave their backgrounds. But I think it would be helpful to everyone if we all did that. So Bob, why don't you start and we'll just go around the screen and do that.
Okay, well, I had a long access with Batco, a long history with Batco. I've also been somewhat involved with the system as it connects to the schools with Emerson and Sawyer and at the high school. I was involved in the committee before and interested in how it's doing. I don't have much, I don't use the cable itself much. I get most of my TV off the air rather than over the cable. But I am interested in trying to make the system work well. I foresee a major change to what Comcast is doing in the next, during the period of this contract. And one of those is I see the demise of cable casting and just being replaced entirely by the network, by internet connection. So that will be an interesting thing to discuss with Comcast and what that future will be.
Francis, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, I'm Frances Morgan. I previously was a co-chair for the Special Education Parents Advisory Committee for the entire school district. So I have some background working with open meeting law and things like that. Mostly I was interested in joining the Cable Advisory Committee because working with the other towns, I know that many people in the tech industry chose to live in Stowe over Bolton when they were looking for houses because Stowe has better connectivity than Bolton. And one thing that I'm interested in is possibly having Bolton join the municipal fiber optics program that was more robust and is looking to get reinvigorated as we get federal infrastructure funds. And so I've been in contact with Susan Crawford at Harvard Law School, who helped found the initial municipal fiber optics program. And she got me in touch with David Eisenberg, who's in Falmouth, trying to use, he's very successfully pieced together all of the different state grants and federal grants to get full fiber optics in Falmouth. And I think they're going like fully live in April or something like that. So he's willing to help us kind of figure out how to piece everything together. But I don't know if that's even strictly the purview of this committee. So I'd be interested in hearing what other people are interested in.
Great. That sounds exciting. JP, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so We moved into town last August, so I'm very new to town. And when the opportunity came up to volunteer for the Cable Advisory Board, I decided, hey, why not? I've been in the industry for a very long time, not as a member of the cable company, but as a, an employee of companies like Cisco Systems and Dell Technologies. So I've sold to cable companies and to Verizon. So I know the technology quite well. And I thought maybe I can add some value here. And that's why I'm here. I'm not very familiar with all the procedures, part of running government and stuff like that. So in the process of being a member, I hope to learn how to do that more effectively.
Good. Danielle.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm hoping you can hear me. Hello?
Yes. Yep.
Okay,
Go right
sorry. So I basically volunteer for the cable company. Not that I have a lot of background on that, but I feel like it was important to be part of it, to upgrade the school system for our kids, and also make sure that we have a good system working. So I'm here to learn from you guys. Basically, I don't have a lot of experience on that. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great. And Jeff, you mentioned you were a web person, but go ahead.
Yep. So my name's Jeff Larkin. I've been in Bolton for about 3.5 years. So I work in the tech industry. I'm actually a software engineer by trade, originally from Utah via Arkansas and Canada to come here. I was an early cord cutter, so I actually cut my cable cord early. So I do a lot of streaming on the internet. Anyway, to help there, and I volunteered because I thought it sounded interesting. Haven't ever done any of these before, so pretty ignorant in like how it's supposed to be run and everything like that. But just I figured with my tech background, I could help. So
Great. That sounds very useful. Nikki, did you want to say anything before we moved on?
Sure. I'm Nikki McGackey. I'm the executive director at Bolton Access TV. We are the cable access provider for Bolton, and pretty much all of our funding comes through the franchise fee, which is a part of the Comcast contract that we sign every 10 years. So I am not a part of the committee, but I am at your disposal and will work with you guys closely. And like Ken mentioned, I used to work at Stowe TV, and I live here in Stowe. And they are currently going through their renewal process with Comcast.
Okay.
That they are just finishing that up maybe in the next couple months. So that
Well,
is
that's good
me.
to know.
Yeah.
And let me just mention a little of my background. I've lived in town for, 47 years, I guess now. And I've been in town in government for most of that time in one form or another. I was a selectman until 2010. And in 2010, right after I retired in May, and in June and July, Bob Johnson here and our colleague Rick Merrill, who was playing a lead role in running of the station in 2010, approached me and said, would I be president of the board of Bolton Access TV? I thought, oh, sure, that sounds fun and no big deal. It was a big deal. But we're still here, and during the now 12 years, we've really turned the station around and turned it into something that is a real community resource now, and is pretty helpful. So it was a logical thing when 3 or so years after that, the license came up for renewal, that several of us got involved in that. And so I was the chair of the committee at that time. And, have just stayed involved in that sort of way by, I won't say training necessarily, but I was a transportation analyst at the U.S. Department of Transportation in Cambridge for many years, and for the last 17 years after leaving them, have been a consultant in that field, and I'm currently involved in the master planning committee, and I'm also involved with the Cadet EMT program in town. So kind of stay off the streets in that way. I'm very intrigued by what, Francis, what you were saying about the municipal fiber optics. And what I would say is that it's not part of the contract, but it certainly is an appropriate thing for this group to work on. And until we're told that we shouldn't. But it would seem to me that it's a great idea. Some of you might know that, and Bob, I don't know if you can remember the timing of this, but FiOS was the fiber optics program that Verizon has, and many of the towns have it. Stowe has Verizon as one of its cable providers. And there was great interest here. There was discussion here, and for, I guess, financial reasons, I'm not sure whatever it was, but basically Verizon sort of pulled the plug at the Stowe line and said, no, we're not going to be coming to you after all.
Well,
And so
I have a friend who's an electrical engineer, and he telecommutes to a major technology firm, but he was telling me that there is fiber optics that might run along 117, but it's definitely close enough in Clinton that we would be looking at last mile for our hardware. We don't actually necessarily need a major artery. We have one close enough to town. So, I mean, we'd have to like go through the state and get a full evaluation, and part of the grant that we could get would be able to go toward that evaluation of like what's available. And then the idea is like if we had municipal fiber optics, we would be Verizon. People would be paying us for their the town. It would become a municipal utility, and so it would. I mean, if we're paying if cable access TV is getting their funding through Comcast fees, we could start a municipal like financial line for the cable access through the FiOS. That people have done things like that too. So it's like, so a lot of the things that I read in the contract get affected by us establishing like a municipal fiber optics, and then we have a lot more bargaining power. Comcast will basically be renting our hardware to be bringing cable into people's homes if they have fiber optics from like the Bolton fiber optic lines. That's how it's been working in other towns. A lot of towns out in Western Mass worked with Susan Crawford 5 to 10 years ago, and they got some of their funding for last mile efforts stalled in the past couple years. But David Eisenberg down in Falmouth has been able to kind of jump over some of the hoops that were put in the way for last mile fiber optics. So I mean,
that sounds exciting and worth looking into. I guess what we would have to be careful of is how the two objectives would end up conjoining if they did.
Right. I think one thing I mean, I was looking at the timeline, and one thing that I noticed was like, we have about 2 years to kind of figure out what we're gonna, like, work with Comcast to figure out what we're gonna do. And in those 2 years, we could get a feasibility study done and possibly figure out what's going to happen. So we might want to get a feasibility study done and then talk to Comcast about not signing such a long contract. If we need to do a contract that's fully them for providing cable, and we don't have time to like put a full fiber optic system in the next 2 years, or, you know, like, or we sign a contract for 10 years, but at some point know that it might become moot from our, like, from the town side of the contract. So, I mean, it affects what we sign if we were to, as a town, pursue installing a municipal utility.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Doesn't the contract allow us to have an alternate provider? I thought I read that, but I'm not sure.
I'm sure that they do, because as I said, Stowe has both Comcast and Verizon,
Right.
and there are
right.
other towns that potentially have multiple ones.
Yeah.
So it's not a matter of their objecting or not objecting. It's not, and it might well give us some bargaining power in the contract. I'm not exactly sure how that would work. I mean, it's certainly worth looking into. And if there is so I guess a question that you might find out something on, Francis, is whether the kind of feasibility study you're talking about is something for which there are existing grants at the state level or somewhere like that, because you have to pay somebody for that feasibility study, presumably, and we have no money to do that and no mechanism to do it unless, and we probably have to hurry with this, but unless we wanted to have an article on the town meeting warrant for May for X number of dollars to do a feasibility study.
Yeah.
And now that would need to be coordinated fairly quickly with the select board as well as with the advisory committee, because you would want to have their support for that sort of thing, whatever it was that was determined it would cost to do it and things of that sort.
And I would say that like the time is of the essence if we were going to look into a grant funding it too, because we would need, there's a special PIN that the town selectmen are given to apply for certain grants. And I can send everyone like how the municipal grants work. But I think that the grant cycle starts at the end of this month and closes in May. So I know
there's a grant cycle for this municipal fiber optics.
for municipal fiber optics. Yeah.
Okay.
And I can send that. And I know for open meeting law purposes, I can send everyone documents, but we can't really talk about them until we go for the next meeting. But I can send everyone what I've collected so far. And then if you guys want to come up with your own research and ideas and input, like it's like we're not allowed to discuss anything outside of a public meeting, but I can send you all of the information and then we can talk about it and you guys can do all of your own research and bring it to the next meeting.
We can have an agenda item for the next meeting.
Okay.
To discuss it, and you can distribute the material, and then we can have a discussion to see where we would go with that and what the next steps would need to be as far as dealing with the people in the town and things of that sort.
Okay.
Francis, I don't know if you have heard of this or not, but I think it was the FCC is doing an emergency broadband benefit program kind of thing that they started during COVID. That
Who's
may
doing
be
that?
as well. The FCC, it's a federal level.
And they have a fund and they have a grant for that too? Or is that?
I'm not entirely sure how it works. It's definitely a program aimed at bringing increased internet speeds to communities that are a bit internet underserved. So I don't know if we kind of fall into that category or not, but it might be worth looking at.
Okay.
Is that part of the, do we know if that's part of the Infrastructure Act.
I'm not sure. I'll send you guys. I get emails from them, so I'll send you one of the emails. I haven't looked into it in any depth.
Okay, well, that
And-
would be interesting.
May I speak?
Sure.
Ken, you may want to have your participants tab opened up as chair, because then you'll be able to see or appoint somebody to keep their eye on the participants tab, because then you'll see when hands were up, because I know Nikki had her hand up for a while. And it won't be a big issue when it's just your group, but if you have guests come to future meetings in the Zoom platform. But the reason I have my hand up is when you were talking about the possibility of getting an article on this year's town warrant, that deadline has actually passed. The select board is meeting next Thursday to go through the final warrant with town council, and then they'll be closing the warrant on March 24th. So the deadline for new articles have passed. In fact, the advisory committee is having their final meeting on Tuesday. So I just wanted to let you know what was possible.
What's the deadline for citizens petition?
That would be a question for Pam. So you could write to Pam Powell tomorrow. And she can let you know how many signatures are needed.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with that, if you have, I believe for an annual meeting, it's only 10, but it could be 20. But anyway, if you get citizens to sign a petition, then an article can be put onto the town meeting warrant to be discussed there. Now, it's because it's coming from citizens and not from the town government, it's kind of an outlier. And so it may or may not be seriously considered, and it may or may not fit into the budgetary plans that are being put forward for the meeting, but it's legally possible to do it, even though the warrant is closed or nearly closed. So yeah, we would just have to find out what that date would be. But I think it's probably more important to do the background work on what the grant program is, and what the federal program is, and just what other people have done. And, you know, Francis, to build on the sort of thing you're talking about, so that we would have a case to take to somebody if the decision was that we did need town funding. If we didn't need town funding, then the grant could be probably worked through, since we're part of the town government, could be worked through the town government and ultimately approved by the selectmen and wouldn't have to have a town meeting. So the homework is probably more important than trying to ram through a citizen's petition. But that is something that's possible to do. It certainly is an important thing to, I think, to get more information about. And I think, JP, it was you who sent me a note the other day that said a lot has changed in 10 years, and that's true. And so this is a way for us to learn more about how it's changed. And when we do explore that sort of a program and how it would work, we would need to find out how it would relate both to Comcast and its existing customers, and to the way that we operate as the cable access provider at Bolton Access TV,
The line to
and
come
the
through.
role that it plays and the kind of things that it does. Because, and I think one other thing that would be important to find out in all of that, perhaps from Falmouth or some of these other people, is where do they get the capital to implement the system? Because one of the things that Comcast did, or Charter did, or any of the other cable providers, Verizon and others, is they paid money to put things on the poles in the town. And so that it's basically their infrastructure. So if we're wanting to install a new infrastructure, then somebody's going to have to pay for that. And if it's going to be the town that's the owner of it, then presumably it's going to have to be the town that would do that. And so, so I would think that, you know, we would need to really do a cost analysis as to what it would cost the town to do that. Part of my experience in the town is that we are not as good as we perhaps ought to be as a town at maintaining things. That we can buy stuff, but the cost that year to year after something is purchased, we're not so good at. And so we need to keep that in the back of our minds when we plan out anything like this, so that we know where the money is going to come from. And if it's going to come from the taxpayers, that's one thing. If it's going to come from the subscribers to the service, then that's another thing. And so it's just part of the analysis that we would need to do. So does Falmouth have a cable provider right now?
Yes, they have Comcast, and I think they have Verizon, but basically from the articles I read, they started the FiOS program because they were not happy with their options, and they were pretty smart in watching what was going on out in Western Mass, and then tried to troubleshoot some of the things. Because what happened was Western Mass did Susan Crawford's original program and then got stalled, kind of like you said, in like at the last mile implementation, and they're still fighting with the Polito Baker administration over funding that was promised but not given.
Oh, really?
And yeah, but Falmouth has figured out a way to overcome that, and also through their program, they might be getting federal funding through infrastructure. So it's a very dynamic platform right now, but right now, like the state still has a basic grant, and I believe there's a certain amount of the grant that can go to like feasibility studies, and then like the infrastructure part of it, I think it's a 50-50 match. Like you can ask for up to $500,000, but the town has to also be willing to put up $500,000. So there's two levels of the grant, from what I can understand.
Yeah, and see, that's an important part of what we would need to know is if the grant can be used for the infrastructure, then that's a good thing, and that would make it a much more achievable process than if you were all on your own. That's good to know, though. Well, any information you could get to share with us would be good. And I think that we definitely want to have an agenda item next time where you can sort of lead a discussion of some of that, or we can talk about some of the issues that either that we've talked about tonight or that we bring up at that time in that to see what we do next. And then perhaps reach out to the fellow in Falmouth or to some of the Western Mass towns or something to see what they've actually done. I mean, I would say that overall, people are not necessarily pleased with what Comcast provides. There are a lot of complaints and I mean, you know, and I see all the time on the community Facebook page, people wanting to have different alternatives. And it's natural to want to have competition. But it's a utility and it's their hardware that we're using. So it's a matter of what's the alternative. If that fiber optics with grants is an alternative, then great, let's let's see what we can do with it and see what effect that would have. Um,
It's Danielle. I have a comment.
Sure.
So I agree with, is it Francis? So
Francis, right.
I think that fiber optic will be beneficial to this town, not only because I think higher speed internet will be great. We have Comcast and we've had multiple problems with it, and I think this is something that we should really look into and probably have the next, like you mentioned, have a meeting and try to see if we can look into it more deeply. That's my comment.
Great.
Now, I can confirm that Verizon does offer FiOS in Bolton, but only parts of town. But there seems to be a distinction. This is not the same Verizon service that's available in Stowe, which includes cable casting. I don't know if they have different names for these two distinct services, but there is a difference. And I assume there's a difference there in, for example, the Verizon FiOS does not involve a town contract the way Comcast does. So I assume the contract is primarily tied to the cable casting and not to the internet service.
So you're saying that FiOS is mostly internet?
Verizon apparently offers FiOS, that's fiber optic, along Route 117. And I think it's mainly aimed at servicing businesses that want a high-speed connection, but that connection is not available throughout town.
I think that from what I understand, FiOS was the hardware is not necessarily fully owned by Verizon. It's heavily subsidized by the federal and state government. And so they can't necessarily make contracts for delivering on that hardware because it's not fully Verizon's hardware. And FiOS, Verizon had a federal contract to deliver a certain level of high-speed internet by 2020, and they fell short of that contract. And so now they're trying to renegotiate with the federal government, and it's unclear what level of ownership anyone's going to keep over that hardware. So like, it's a pretty dynamic, crazy field. So I don't know how the contracts work with FiOS, but like Verizon owns its own internet or its own cable service. It makes its own deals with entertainment programs, and they have a cable service, and that's what you have to get a contract for, either individually or municipally. But FiOS is a hardware, has a hardware component to it, and that was heavily subsidized by the federal and state government. So there's a certain component of like our tax dollars delivered that hardware, and so like that's something that we could look into tapping into, because it came from our tax dollars in addition to Verizon putting funding into it.
We also have more difficult connection problems here in Bolton. There are a lot of areas like I'm on Coventry Wood where services are underground. And there are a lot of places in town where even the service from the street to the house is very expensive and either underground or needs additional poles where it's not a conventional connection. I assume that those connections in many places would be by RF rather than by fiber.
Well, that's kind of the last mile portion of it, is how do you get it from your main artery to different neighborhoods, and then from those neighborhoods to each individual house. That's like the last mile question. And initially when the program was developed, it was from the main artery to every individual house, and most of the fiber optic lines are underground. But the idea was that like fiber optics would come through to the houses, and then even some of the towns out west ordered, like there was a long battle on getting approved good routers for fiber optics that came from Korea, and the security of that and all of that was a big problem. But they figured those out. They were part of the initial programs that the towns out west had signed up for. And then the funding was stripped a couple years ago. And so now they're talking about putting that funding back into the federal infrastructure bill, or using some of the infrastructure money for putting it back into the last mile problems that they're having out west. Yeah, it's it's kind of complicated, I guess. But I can send you the research that I've done so far, and there are quite a few news articles that follow everything that's been going on, kind of in like the Western newspapers. Falmouth newspaper has some, and then yeah, then I've talked to a few of the people involved in developing the statewide program. And they're very busy, so they've pointed me to other people who've been really helpful. But yeah, I can get you what I have, and then I'm still talking to David about what can be done to tap into different hardware and install hardware. But we basically would need a feasibility study. That's kind of the first step.
I would assume would be a kind of a second level interest on as far as the federal interest goes, since we're an area that already has a service, and we're talking about adding a second service, not the initial one. So I would think that federal spending would primarily be on unserved areas.
We don't have fiber optics in all areas of the town, and we don't necessarily have right now rights to the fiber optic artery that goes through town, but we could. I mean, I think like if we were to establish a municipal utility, that would be us claiming our rights on our tax dollars on the artery that's already going through town, and then like spending some money to move it from that artery to the last mile, which is like from the artery to the houses. Like, and that would be the infrastructure we would have to, and that would probably be something the town would have to vote on, because even if we got the grant, we would have to pay for half of the infrastructure ourselves as a town.
Okay, oh, thank you.
Well, we would have a lot of homework to do before,
Yeah.
before presenting that and determining who had to approve and all that sort of stuff. But it's certainly worth exploring further and seeing what the barriers are and how you can implement something like that in a way that doesn't harm anybody on the way. Because what you wouldn't want to do is to implement that over a 4-year period and have Comcast stop providing service to everybody during the first year of that, or something like that, if you follow what I'm saying. So
Yeah, I mean,
so
I
we
think
need
that-
to really need to figure out how that could be done. And I think it would be good to find out in these communities where they do have Comcast is how they dealt with them, and whether they dealt with them in an adversarial way or a cooperative way and things like that. It might be Comcast would want to do something. Now, overall, I would say that they have not really wanted to do that much here. And so it might be that there would be a way to have them cooperate to facilitate some of that, but I don't really know. It's kind of hard to say, but it's certainly worth talking about. So I guess other than this fiber optic discussion, what would be helpful for everybody, from everybody's point of view, to help bring us up to speed on things as another agenda item at the next meeting? Something about, I mean, is it, do you want to further understand the funding that comes through the Comcast thing and how that works, or what would be useful as an additional item that besides or do you want to just for the next month, 2, whatever it is, simply zero in on learning more about the fiber optic stuff and going from there. I mean, what do you folks think would be helpful to you as new kids on the block as far as this stuff's concerned?
I have a question. Do we need to go further with a town survey or inquiry regarding the services Comcast has provided and the quality? Or are we satisfied with what we already know about them and can go on without additional research?
I would think that we would want to take the opportunity to do a survey. And if nothing else, I think each of you received from Bob Sikansky, the chair of the select board, a copy of what was supposedly the 2021 complaint log from Comcast that listed 2 or 3 calls that they had supposedly had during a year. And Bob himself commenting that he had had 3 or 4 issues that had never been resolved that weren't even included on the list. That leads me to think that either people aren't complaining to Comcast, they're just complaining about them, or that there are different kinds of complaints. And so I would think that if for no other reason than the discussion we've been having the last half hour about the fiber stuff, that it would be a good idea to find out from townspeople what their preferences are for getting, if any, for getting, if you will, local news or the local services that can be provided. And if they don't have cable, then what else do they do? If you cut the cord, then what does that really mean in terms of what you get for the money that you spend? And is there a way that any of that can be improved or something like that? I would think we would want to ask those questions and get some input from the people about it. That would be my thought. I don't think we know enough right now.
Yeah, and the last survey we did is like, what, 10 years old?
I think so. I'm trying to remember if we did one since then. If we did, it was just one from the TV station asking people about their viewing habits or something of that sort, but it wasn't really related to cutting the cord. Now, if you haven't seen it, you might want to have Nikki. Why don't you send them all the advertisement we did? But
Sure
the
thing.
whole point of cutting the cord is that in some respects, what it does is to potentially cut people off from any local news about selectmen's meetings or school committee meetings or whatever it is, except that we at Bolton Access TV provide that information online. So you can actually get it, you just don't have to pay for it. And so cutting the cord actually means you can still get the same services that Bolton Access TV provides, but you don't have to pay for them at all. And so what has happened over the last 2 to 3 years, even discounting the pandemic, because I don't think that had any effect on it, is that the revenue from the fee that people pay to Comcast has gone down each quarter as we get money. And so by going down, what that means is that we end up having less and less money to work with, to have the right equipment that we need for Nikki to have her people go out to televise the meetings or whatever it is that they're gathering information on. And so a discussion that all stations have had has been, how do we deal with this financially? And they may need other revenue sources or whatever it is, but I think it's part of what we can learn more about. If we have a few questions related to that, then I think it would give us some additional information about what the community is looking for, how it uses what it has, but also what it's looking for that it's not getting, if anything.
Do we know who else besides Comcast provides internet service to the Bolton community?
I don't know that
Comcast-
we,
Only internet provider, as well as cable provider in Bolton, unless you have, some kind of cell based
right,
internet.
and I think that's or the satellite ones like DirecTV or whatever. And I think that's what JP is talking about is,
Oh,
do
yeah.
we know that? And I don't think we have statistics on that.
Yeah.
But that's another good reason to have a survey, is to ask people how you get your internet service in addition. So it could be a two-part survey that part of it is about the internet and then part of it is about the cable.
That was actually one of
part
the
of it.
questions I had is like, I have Comcast service, but I get cable TV, right? I get internet and I get my telephone all through
Right,
Comcast,
right. Yeah, and a
And-
lot of people do that. And that's,
right?
yeah, and that's something when we begin to talk about a municipal fiber utility, then you're running into what JP just talked about. You're running into those who have their phone through Comcast as well as their internet through Comcast. Now, you could probably get your internet through the fiber optics, but can you get your phone service? And the answer is probably no. And so then what do you do? And so it's part of what we need to collect some data. Now, Comcast supposedly does surveys, and they supposedly provide us, and in this case, us meaning the town, with Bob, is that a quarterly report or an annual, or Nikki, is that an annual report that they get where it lists the cable's subscribers and so forth?
We're supposed to get it annually.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought it was annually, because like June, because I think the payment that we get for equipment is based on that number or something. I don't know. But anyway,
Right.
long story short, I think it would be a good idea to think about a survey and have it be fairly broad in the technical sense of covering internet, covering cable, maybe even covering phone, and just asking people, what do you have? Are you happy with it? And other things of that sort. Just to see where people are with it. And that information then can be useful to us. It can become, yeah, and we'll have to find out if we need to do one of those assessment reports that I sent you, but we'll have to see whether another one of those is required, and that would be good information to put in there. And that may help us also in the whole context of the feasibility study on the fiber as to how those things would complement each other or conflict with each other, and whether there's anything that feeds into this. So why don't we have a survey agenda item next meeting, and just talk about the things that would be included. And why don't you think about the sorts of things that you would like to know about, or that you would want to answer if you were providing information to the town about the technology that you wish you had, or that you were using. And it would be good, I think, too, in that survey to, if you will, include some information, some questions about viewing habits, because there's so many choices now, and a lot of the things like HBO and those that are on cable are now streaming services. I was at my daughter's over the weekend and they have Disney Plus and they have some other one. So what does it mean to a person out there who has Disney Plus and Hulu and something else? What are they watching with that? It may be that nobody watches the news anyway, or whatever it is. But it would be interesting to get some of that data and be able to analyze some of that and see what that tells us about where we ought to be going with some of these things.
So I just want to mention, I'm one of those people that's cut everything and does all streaming services. So I've got Disney, HBO, all that stuff. So yeah, I've got specific needs that I would want. So, and I don't use Comcast I have their cable package simply because it made my internet cheaper.
Mhm. But you don't use the cable part of it at all?
If we want our news, we go to like the CBS app and watch it there, or the NBC
Okay,
app.
and how do you find the comparative cost of the various streaming services when you add them all up?
So I'm pretty good about only, I will use the streaming service for a couple of months, watch everything I want on it, drop it, and then
Okay.
pick up a different one. There's a couple I've got, like Disney. I've got 4 kids, so I always have Disney. But there's others that I will pick up and drop.
So it's
based on
easy
the
to pick
season.
up and drop?
Oh yeah,
Good. Well,
a
that's
lot of
good
them
to
can be
know.
month to month. So
Okay, well, think about questions. And part of it in the survey, I think we also need to have it be how they like the services they have, whatever they are. And in particular, if it's Comcast, then how do they like the services? And if they're having drops or whatever it might be, then how responsive are they to fix those and things of that sort. And by the way, we would have to think about that in the context of the fiber optic, is if that goes out, then who's fixing that and how does it get fixed and how quickly and things like that. And it's one thing to have a huge company like Comcast with all of its trucks that can go around, and another to have a municipal operation that may or may not have people in trucks that can respond that quickly. So we ought to just think about that too.
So if we're still talking about the agenda, I have maybe one thing I'd like to kind of discuss, or
Okay.
it is, 10 years ago, we did the survey. We also came up with a list of requirements. We negotiated a new contract. We got a new contract. Okay, so what exactly is in that contract? And have those requirements, were they accepted by Comcast, right? And are they part of that contract? Right? So what got into the contract, what fell out of the contract? And then as we do our survey, we probably will come up with a set of new requirements that we want to get into the new contract going forward as well. So
Okay, maybe what, I'm
a,
sorry. Yeah, that's a good idea.
a simple, summary view of our contract, if that's
Yeah. Yeah, so what we can do is just kind of walk through it. We sent it to everybody, so take a look at it. But what we could do in the meeting is just kind of walk through it and just answer yes or no. Did they do that one? Yes.
Yeah.
If not, then what did they do? And if they didn't do it, why, or whatever it might be.
Right.
Because that would then help us to identify things that we might want to have be done differently. So that's a good idea. So we'll talk about fiber optics. We'll talk about a survey, and we can talk about the existing contract. And let's put down an item for what I'm going to call state requirements. And what I'll do is is see if I can track down who it is at the state level that we're supposed to be working with, what new documentation, if any, they've got, and things of that sort.
I was also wondering, just kind of going back to the contract piece of it, like I was, before joining this committee, I was unaware that the cable, the local town cable channel was funded through Comcast. And if like Comcast is giving less money every year to that, like that's a service that I would like to put money into, even if I only do streaming services, I have no cable, but I still use, you know, the streaming service for the meetings. And so I would gladly pay, even if it had to be Comcast $5 a month, so that their streaming service was more steady. But if we could figure out a way to like kind of inform the community that like that
Sure.
our contract is coming to that service, and it can we disconnect it or pay for it another way, like how that could happen too, because I don't use cable, but I would gladly pay $5 to Comcast if that meant that our
Well,
local cable was paid
it
for.
would be better if you paid it to Bolton Access TV,
Yeah,
which is a nonprofit.
right.
It's a nonprofit, so it's tax deductible, and they would be able to use that money to offset to help to pay for the use of the services by those of you that aren't Comcast subscribers. So that would be fine, but it's not to Comcast. But the money actually comes from Comcast subscribers, because the way that it works, and I think it's still the case that the statutory limit on the fee that can be tacked on to a cable bill is 5%. And that 5%, some of it is taxes, but that 5% comes to Bolton Access TV, it comes to the town on a quarterly basis from Comcast. Last meeting of the select board, they approved something in the order of $28,000 for the quarter, which is the amount of money that we tend to get now. 3 or 4 years ago, we were in the $32,000 to $33,000 range. So that's the kind of the amount that per quarter that it's gone down. And that money pays for Nikki's salary and for any of the other people who are helping her. And it pays for the upkeep of the equipment that we've got and the operation of the school committee meetings and all those sorts of things that are done that way. But certainly money is really helpful for that. And we've not gone out of our way to solicit. But it's certainly something that Nikki started that back in November, and on Giving Tuesday or whatever it was, we ran a tongue-in-cheek ad that I was the speaker in about cutting the cord, and basically advocated that people give money. And actually, we got several thousand or several $100s out of that, Nikki?
We ended up getting about 2,000. So
Yeah.
I was
So-
very pleased.
You're welcome
with
to contribute.
Exact.
But that's one of the things that we need to make sure as we talk about further cutting of the cord and further reduction in Comcast or whatever it is, that whatever services that Bolton Access TV is providing that people find useful, we want to make sure there's a way that those can continue from whatever source. And we've always figured that the money is going to keep going down, so we need to have alternative sources. And so more fundraising is certainly one way to do that. And so that would certainly be welcome. So let's include in the review of the contract the funding mechanism, okay? So we'll include what what their rates are and how that rate is broken down. We can look at somebody's Comcast bill and see where those different charges are, what they mean, and things like that.
I would also like to see us check with the schools and what use they're making of Comcast in the school. When they digitized the signal, they lost the ability to use television in most of the classrooms, and I don't know if the school has found a path around that or not.
Did they digitize the signal?
Yeah, the cable casting now is done on a digital format, and the
Oh, it is.
school-
I didn't think they'd changed that. Well, that's good. I didn't know that. No, you raise a good point. The schools are an equal partner in this, and we're kind of uniquely located, being in the middle of the district, literally and figuratively. And so in some sense, when we negotiate with Comcast, we're negotiating on behalf of the school district as well. And so, so it is important that we find out what their requirements are. So we can put that down as, if we don't get to it at the next meeting, at least we'll cover it at some point. And I think it would be good if we talk to somebody there, find out who they want to have to be the focal point for these sorts of discussions. I know that the superintendent is interested in increasing the video program at the high school and would love to have a studio and things of that sort to make videos. Historically, Comcast and other cable providers include money for that. And so since they don't have one, it's possible that that could be included as well. So we just need to find out who their point of contact is, perhaps get them to have a liaison who could attend our meetings and represent them and things of that sort. So let's include that as well. Now, one of the things we're supposed to talk about is our fourth agenda item is to, we've been talking about the fifth one now, future agenda items, but the fourth one is to establish a meeting schedule. So I don't know whether, well, let me put it this way. In general terms, boards in town, boards and committees in town either meet bi-weekly or monthly. But it of course depends on the business that they've got, but they usually try to establish a specific night that they meet, usually night anyway. And that way they have a known schedule, they can keep that schedule, it's made public and all that kind of thing in case people want to come. So what we might want to do, since this month has 3 Tuesdays in it, we might want to meet on the 15th and then the 29th, just as a part of our getting up to speed. So we have the fiber discussion, we have the survey discussion, we have the state requirements discussion, we have the review of the Comcast contract, and we have a discussion of what the school needs and all of that. And then once we determine that we want to devote more time in the near future to the fiber thing, then we perhaps, which, not meet quite so often or whatever it was, and just kind of go from there. I don't even remember what our frequency was of meeting 10 years ago, but I would guess that it was probably monthly. But what's the feeling of, would you like to, well, I guess for those of you who like Francis, we're going to do homework on some things and provide information. Do you want extra time so that we should maybe wait till the end of the month? Or would you want to meet on the 15th and have self-imposed deadlines of 2 weeks to pull together some information?
I have-
What's the thinking?
I have background information. I think like I'm still talking to David Eisenberg, and I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation. So I might not have a lot of information from him for a little while, but I have enough that I could put together. I can send some documents to everyone, and I can put together a presentation and answer some questions
Okay.
by the 15th.
Okay. Would people want to meet in 2 weeks, or do you want to stretch it out?
Work.
Okay. Well, why don't we agree then that we're going to meet on, is Tuesday a good night? I mean, Ed isn't here,
Yeah.
so we may be able to consult him, but is there a better night of the week than for everybody than this Tuesday that we chose?
Tuesday's fine by me.
Tuesday's good for me.
Okay,
Tuesdays
so
work for me as well.
All right, so for now, let's pick the 15th and the 29th as our next two meetings, and tentatively Tuesday meetings, and then we'll see. We'll talk with Ed and find out what his availability is. And Ed, Ed's been on the cable group off and on since it started 15 years ago. And he's a computer expert. And so has been really helpful in those ways. And he's also head of Parks and Rec, and and is on the master planning committee. And he's also involved with the council level of Boy Scouts in this area. And so he brings a number of different takes to the table that I think will also be helpful to us. So we don't want to exclude him from this, but for now, let's set those two, the 15th and the 29th, as meetings. For now, let's just put all five. I wrote down 5 agenda items. I don't know, JP, if you
Yeah, I
wrote that one or not, but
got 5 as well. So
yeah, okay. So why don't we go with those 5?
Yeah.
What you can't do is talk about something that isn't on the agenda, but you don't have to discuss something that is on the agenda if you don't have time to get to it. And so I think if we have those 5 things on there, and we order them in a way that is helpful to the flow of the meeting, then I think we can make a judgment when we get into it. Because we don't want to have 3 and 4 hour meetings the way some groups do. We probably ought to try to keep it to this length or a little less even, if we can. And so why don't we plan to do that and get back together then, and everybody take a look at the materials that Francis is going to send and that I provided, and anything else that you can find. We can ask a few questions of other people, and think about what you would want to ask each other on a survey, and your neighbors and stuff on a survey. And then we can set up doing something on that. The town has had reasonable luck in surveys over the years. The Conservation Trust did a major survey in advance of the town common being built and got like 465 responses, which is actually statistically significant, which is pretty good. And so I think it'll be time well spent. And if we put it on SurveyMonkey, which I believe the town has an account for anyway, it doesn't cost anything. It's pretty easy for most people to get. We'll distribute some hard copies of it so that people who don't have access can fill it out anyway, and then we'd be able to enter that data. And then they have pretty good tools for displaying the results. And so I think there's some useful information that we'd be able to get out of that to help us on our way. So let's think about that and plan for that. So I'll get with Jeff. Jeff, if you're going to be our poster of the agenda, I'll get with you to, after JP sends us the minutes, I'll get with you on what we put in the agenda, and so we can craft that agenda and the Zoom. Well, and I guess that's a question we should decide. Do you want to keep doing Zoom, or do you want to meet in person?
I can do both.
Well, it may be easier for the moment to continue to Zoom, and so for now, let's plan on the next meeting being Zoom, and we can decide at the time whether the one after that is or isn't, so that the agenda that gets published will have the link in it and all that sort of stuff. JKP, you can send draft of the minutes to everybody, but people shouldn't respond to everybody with their comments. They should send their comments back to JP. He can incorporate them, and then the first agenda item will be approval of the minutes.
I got you.
And that way, he can, and you can distribute advanced copies of, after you've incorporated people's comments or whatever, so that people will be able to read them, and then they can be approved as amended or whatever at the beginning of the meeting, and go from there. So I think that's
I'll send a draft
that's
out.
where that.
I'll send a draft out tomorrow.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, anything else at the moment then? Because we probably ought to all go watch the State of the Union,
No.
even if we don't have TV. You go online and watch it, right?
Right, streaming.
Okay, so is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll set a motion to adjourn.
Okay. All in favor? Okay, so we're
Aye.
adjourning at 8. So we're adjourning at 8:24, and the next meeting will be Tuesday, the 15th at 7. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
So I guess, and Jeff, you could stop the recording. Is that right? You're the host now?
Yep, I'm stopping it right now.